Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome in. Going to begin with an odd announcement that it looks like most of you probably are aware of, but if you are not aware, this is the odd part. You don't normally have a teacher stand up and immediately tell people to go somewhere else. But if you are interested, we do have a men's class that is starting this week in the kitchen, and so I will not be offended. In fact, would be very fine if anybody wants to proceed to that. We're going to be studying 1st and 2nd Thessalonians here in the auditorium this semester, this quarter, and very excited for the opportunity to be here with you and learn alongside you as we study these two great books. These are incredibly rich books that have a lot for us to understand, a lot to offer us, and looking forward to delving deeply into it. As you can see on the slide above you, the slide above me, you can see that today we're going to be spending our time sort of with a little bit of an introduction to this book. We're going to talk about some of the high-level themes. We're going to talk a little bit about the background, the people to whom it was written, some of the situations they were dealing with, and then over the course of the next several weeks, we'll be going chapter by chapter in an analysis of this particular book. But I am very glad to be here with you this quarter and looking forward to studying this along with you as we begin today with an introduction to Paul's letters to the Thessalonians. I thought it would be good for us to get a little bit of an understanding of the region, the area, the city of Thessalonica, And what we have here is an ancient rendering. It's really hard to see on that. I will tell you it's not any better when you see it on my screen either. But this is a rendering, ancient rendering of the city of Thessalonica. It was a walled city. It is located right here on this map. You can see it right in this area here. This is the Aegean Sea, and it does have a seaport to the south. The city of Thessalonica was surrounded on three sides by a big wall. And of course, the seaport down here on the southernmost edge of the city. It was an incredibly important city by Paul's time. It was a very, very large city. In fact, it was the second largest city of the region. It was the capital of the region that came to be known as Macedonia. This region was the region of Macedonia, as you can see up here on this part of the map. And Macedonia spread right in this area here. And it was the capital city of the region of Macedonia. Just an interesting little tidbit, the city of Thessalonica was named by King Cassander. King Cassander established the city of Thessalonica in the year 35 BC. And, I'm sorry, not 35 BC, 315 BC, yeah. 315 BC. Cassander is famous because he had a son named Alexander, who had a son named Philip, who had a son named Alexander, who had a son named Philip, who had a son named Alexander, who had a son named Philip, until you get to Alexander the Great. And that wouldn't come around until 32 BC. But he is the beginning line of the great kings of Macedon. And Thessalonica is named after his wife. His wife's name was Thessaloniki, which, interestingly, if you were to travel to this city today, it is called Thessaloniki. It reverted back to its original name in the modern world. Thessalonica was an important city for many reasons. One of them was that it was a really strong military outpost. Because it was the capital city, it was the largest city for Roman military operations in this area. So it had an enormous military presence. It had a great Roman government presence there. And it was of importance partly because of its location. This red line right here is the Via Egnatia. And I'm sure I'm saying that improperly, but this was the largest, it was actually the first, and became the largest road built outside of Italy by the Romans. The Romans were famous for their roads. The Romans were famous for building commerce. In fact, there's a very interesting little story. I don't know why I'm telling you this. This has nothing to do with our story, but I find this story fantastic. Do you know that today the measurements of the space shuttle are based on Roman roads? When Rome developed their first roads, they established what the average width of a wagon was, and they doubled it so you could have lanes going both ways, and that average width of a wagon became the standard for American automakers, became the standard for American highway systems, and even to this day, when they design, of course they haven't for years, but they are presently designing a new space shuttle. The new space shuttle has to be able to go on highways, and so it is limited by the width of our highway system, which is based on the Via Egnatia and the other roads that the Romans built. Very, very interesting. Cool stuff when you see how history plays out. This road was of incredible importance. As you can see, it's a very, very long road, and it includes all the way out to the Adriatic Sea. Coming along here, we go through entrance into the Aegean Sea, and then all the way across Macedonia. And so it was a huge trade route. And because it was a centerpiece between the Aegean Sea and all the commerce coming up north, and it was a pathway along the east to west coast coming off of the Adriatic Sea, it was a very important place of commerce. A wealthy city, a powerful city, a prominent city. This would have been the Los Angeles of its day. It really would have been a very, very important place. And it was a cosmopolitan city. And by that I mean that it had lots of different people from lots of different countries that lived there. Very, very large Roman population, as we've already said. Very large Greek population, obviously, because that's the region. But it also had a huge Jewish population. During the diaspora, when we have all these Christians being expelled from Jerusalem and the surrounding areas, one of the places that many of them traveled to, because they were business people and they could set up their businesses there, was Thessalonica. And so you have this really strong Jewish presence there, which is going to explain some of the challenges that this particular church faced as it moved forward. Of course, there also is the famous Colosseum, which ruins you can still go and see today. We have a couple of world travelers in here. Anybody been to Thessalonica? Carol, I look to you because you and Joy are my world travelers. Okay. I haven't been any farther north than Toledo, so I've certainly never been there. I've certainly never been there, and chances are I won't make it there anytime very soon. Let's talk just a moment about the religious and cultural background. Paul here is writing to a fledgling church, and this fledgling church is in the midst of an enormously difficult situation. The city of Thessalonica is enormously pagan, very, very diverse, and it led to all kinds of problems. As Christianity spread through the world at this time, we have to remember that the world obviously was a very pagan world, and some of the predominant religions of the day were very accommodating to Christianity. Some of the dominant religions of the day were very, very resistant, very aggressive towards Christianity. Thessalonica had a combination of both of those, and we see that come out in the religious background of the city of Thessalonica. One thing is the religious influence. Because it was a capital city, because it was a very, very strong military city with Roman soldiers, it had a very strong Roman bent. Now, we remember that the largest religion in the Roman world was cultic worship of the Caesar. That was considered the national religion. The national religion for Rome was that you had to accept that the Caesar was a god, and that because of his deity, he had certain abilities and certain prominence that was afforded him. The Romans were remarkably accommodating in this, because basically they said, you can have whatever other religion you want as long as you accept this religion as well. It led to a very interesting problem. In the early days of Christianity, Christians were called by the Romans atheist, which is very interesting because we were strongly theist. Christianity has always been strongly theist, anything but atheist. But to a Roman, if you didn't accept the pagan god of the Caesar, then you were not a religious person and you were an atheist. Now, you could accept Caesar and any other god you wanted, and that was fine. But they called Christians atheists because they refused to acknowledge Caesar. And so by their standards, they were non-religious people because they didn't follow the singular religion that Rome identified and Rome put forward. When you get down to Thessalonica proper, the god of Thessalonica was called Cabirus. I'm getting a pop. You guys hear that? This was doing this Wednesday too. It was really annoying me. If this keeps doing this, I'll turn this off and we'll fix it before worship. If that gets annoying, just wave at me and go, and I'll just talk louder. Cabarrus is the god we see here, and Cabarrus, this is actually an unusual picture of him. This is a statue that it's a recreation of a statue that was recreated from artwork that was made during the time. But in the temple of Cabarrus, this was the statue that was in the center of it. And I say this is a very unusual depiction of him because he's not dressed in his normal attire. Normally, when you would see a picture, a statue of Cabarrus, he would be dressed as a blacksmith. If you know anything about Greek mythology, who is the god of the blacksmiths? Anybody know? Hephaestus. That's right. Yes, very good. He was the, how, you said Hephaestus? Okay, I've always heard it said Hephaestus, so we have different schools. Well, in Missouri, we didn't pronounce anything right. I'm going to go with you because I think you're probably more right than I am. But because I'm not familiar with that, I'll say it my way. Hephaestus was the god of the blacksmith, the god of the forge, and Hephaestus had many sub-gods underneath him, and Cabarrus was one of the sub-gods, the god of the forge, and so typically he's dressed in a leather apron and a little mushroom cap and a hammer. So if you ever see a statue of a god like that, it's probably Hephaestus, really, but it could also be Cabarrus, although he was very, very less well known. They were very fond of him for a couple of reasons. It was an industrial city. It was a profitable city. It was a city that was built on industry, and so it made sense there. He also has an interesting story. In mythology, he was murdered by his two brothers. He was considered a martyr, and he was held up because he would not go along with the illegal and immoral things that his brothers were doing, and so they killed him, and he was held up as a model of morality, a model of equity and justice. Become kind of ironic when you see how his religion went from there, but that's kind of the background of his story. It was actually a pretty brutal worship, lots and lots of blood sacrifices, lots of things that would have been rather unique in the Greek culture. You know, most of the offerings to the gods in Greek mythology would have been fruits and grains, and you didn't see a lot of blood sacrifice, a lot of really kind of gory things. But not so here. He was a very severe god, and it really posed some interesting challenges to the Thessalonians, because they were accustomed already to a God with whom blood was associated with salvation. They were already associated with a God who took blood as a token, took high symbolism of blood. And so to a Thessalonian, it became a very, very weird kind of thing. Paul comes in and he's preaching this message of Jesus Christ and Jesus' blood saves. And they're already going, well, we all know about blood saves. And Paul's going, no. You had that all wrong. And so he ended up having to reteach them a symbol that they were already associated with, which led to some very interesting challenges that we'll talk about. Throughout the letters to the Thessalonians, it's very important that we dial in to those times when Paul talks about the blood of Christ, because that would have been really significant to them. They were already familiar with offerings of blood. They were already familiar with themes of sacrifice. They were already familiar with themes of refusing to give in to immorality and dying for it. These are the kinds of things they already knew, and Paul was able to use some of those pre-existing knowledge to say, let me tell you the true story of how all that plays out in the life of Jesus. Cabarrus was also worshipped on some of the other islands throughout the Aegean Sea. In that map that we showed a minute ago, that sea that comes down where the seaport is, there are 5 little islands in there, and the worship of Cabarrus was really isolated to that one region. I really looked into why it didn't spread, why it wasn't more popular, but I couldn't find anything particularly interesting about that, but it is a lot there. The other thing that's important to know is, like most of the Greek gods, like most of the pagan gods at this time, the worship of Cerberus was highly associated with rites of fertility, which is a very, very nice way of saying rampant sexuality. Temple prostitution and those kinds of things were a very, very common part of worship, as they were most of the cities. And so that became a real challenge that Paul had to deal with. As Paul would go from city to city, one of the things that he had to really help people understand was the importance of sexual purity, the importance of sexual morality. And this was a very, very rare concept, something that was very new to many of the people of this day, and it was true in the city of Thessalonica. I mentioned that there was a very large Jewish population here. The Jews actually had a very powerful place in the city of Thessalonica. Unlike the Christians, the Jews for many, many years in Thessalonica had been very accommodating of Caesar worship. So the Romans were very fine with them. The whole Roman rule, you take our God and you can have any other you want. It seems that largely the Jews in Thessalonica were synchronistic, is the word we would use, combining of different faiths. So they could go one day and they could offer the ritual sacrifice to Caesar, and they could go the next day and enjoy synagogue, and they didn't seem to have any trouble with it, which meant the Romans had no trouble with them, which meant that the Jews were in a very, very important place. They were very prominent in the city of Thessalonica. We're going to see that they used their power, their influence, in some difficult ways for the early Christians as we go through the book. Okay. I've covered a lot of that really quick. Any questions you have, any thoughts, any comments about culture, background, location, prominence, anything that we've talked about here? Okay. I know sometimes this first lesson's a little history lesson for some of you. For me, it's like, this is so cool because I love this kind of stuff, but not everybody's into that. So the good news for you is we'll get out of this quickly and move on to other things. And for those of you that are into this, well, good luck. Hang with me for 15 more minutes and we'll cover some more things. Let's talk about the date and authorship. The letters to the Thessalonians. These are obviously attributed to Paul. These are part of the Pauline canon, but they are co-authored by Silas and Timothy. This is something that is a little bit interesting, whereas we know from what modern scholarship has told us that while Paul was the author of most of his books, Paul probably did not write, literally, physically write most of his books. My personal belief is that as Paul began getting up in years, and he didn't have to get many up in years, but that his eyesight was failing him pretty badly. There are a couple of different indications in that. At the end of one letter, he says, "See what large letters I write to you with my own hand." He's denoting that he had not been physically writing up to this point. And here he wanted to write the final greeting, and he had to write it in very big letters. As a person who also would have to write in very big letters, I can relate a little bit to what he might have been going through there. Silas and Timothy were his normal scribes that would write the letter as he would dictate it to them. Here, though, they seem to have more of a co-authorship, and that's an interesting thing. Paul, at this point, seems to be writing much more in concert with Silas and Timothy. It seems very much that these letters are a compilation of these three men writing together. Now, as we get into this book, we'll talk a little bit more about why that might be significant. But one thing to remember is this is probably his first epistle to a church. Paul is probably here writing the very first of all of his epistles to a church. And one of the things that we need to remember is that Paul, early on in his missionary ministry, was, first of all, not well known as a missionary yet. He's still establishing himself. He still doesn't have the prominence. He spends a lot of time in these early letters making sure they understand he is an apostle. Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ. He keeps making sure to put that in front of them because that's not something they know yet. Secondly, he's still haunted by his reputation. there are still a lot of Christians who remember this dude was Saul. Saul was bad news. We're not too sure that we are ready yet to just embrace this guy with open arms. And so he spent the first period of his ministry with dragging a big chain behind him of his reputation. And so it might very well be that Paul, Silas, and Timothy writing a letter together would have been better received. Admittedly, Timothy, probably not well known. Silas, very well known. In fact, to some people, Silas might have been better known than Paul even at this point. We read in the very first chapter, the very first verse, that Paul here tells us that he is the author, and Silas and Timothy along with him. So that's not something that's speculated. That's something that's confirmed in the text itself. We think it probably took place around 50, 51. Like I said, a very early letter. And the other thing that's interesting to know about this is that Paul probably wrote this while he was living in Corinth. Paul was living in Corinth for about 18 months. Corinth, of course, was one of Paul's most difficult cities to work with. It was a highly contentious place. It was a place that offered him a great deal of heartburn and heartache. And so he's writing to a troubled church from a troubled church. And there's some corollary there that becomes helpful for us to know as we go along. So a few things about date and authorship. Questions? Comments? Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point, Roger, and it's probably a good thing to bring that out right here from the very first moment. The very reason that Paul was, as you put very well, the apostle to the Gentiles, he was sent to the Gentiles. You guys know that the word apostle just means sent, right? And many times through Scripture, there are people called apostles that it just means a person who was sent. And that gets a little confusing because sometimes it seems to be used more as a title of an apostle, the apostle. And so there's some confusion there you have to work out. But he was the apostle to the Gentiles. He was sent to the Gentiles, partly at least, because the Jews rejected him. The Jews, by and large, resolutely rejected him. And you bring up the two reasons why that is most common. One, you've got a bunch of Jews who hate Paul because he was them. You know, you've got these Jews who were against the church, and they look at Paul and say, you were our champion. You were our best, enemy of the church. And so there's this animosity towards Paul because he's a traitor to the Jewish cause, they would say. And the other reason is the Jews who had accepted Christianity didn't trust him. They were scared of him. They remember this is the guy who hauled off these Christians. And when we talk about Paul as a persecutor of the church, I think sometimes we don't really grasp the gravity of what this means. 2 different times in Paul's letters, we usually just talk about Acts. In Acts, he's called a persecutor of the church. It says that he got letters so that he could go and take people into prison. It's not until later in his epistles that he goes on to say what that is. And Paul said, I saw them killed. I know they were killed. The people I brought into prison, they went on to be executed. And Paul lived his entire life with this incredible burden of guilt, knowing that he was responsible for the death of Christians. He was responsible for the death of Christians. When Paul would say things like, Christ came to save sinners, of whom I am chief. He said that from a standpoint of a guy who was like, I know what it's like to be responsible for the death of innocent people. He was a person who the Jews who were converting to Christ were still very fearful of. And that's a really important point. Thanks. Anything else? Let's talk a little bit about the tone of the book, the stylistic features of the book, some things we can learn. To sum it up in just 3 little statements, the book is very pastoral. The book is very simple. The book is very eschatologically focused. All that means is it's focused on the second coming of Jesus. Big fancy word that just means focused on the second coming of Jesus. But to be honest, I didn't have room to write focus on the second coming of Jesus in that little bitty blank there. So that's why I use that word. When I say that it's a pastoral tone, what does that mean? What does it mean to say that a letter has a pastoral tone? What's the word pastoral even mean? It means shepherd. It means literally shepherd. It comes from the word pasture, the one over the pasture. But when it has a pastoral tone, what would that mean? What? Calmness. Yep, good. Calmness. Yeah.
I think it's just exactly what a shepherd is. He's guarding, he's loving,
Yep.
he's there to protect. Things in that whole
Yep.
thinking that how the shepherds back then kept the flock, watched for enemies or things that would disrupt the church.
Yep. Yep. Very true. All of the things you just said, calmness, protecting, caring, nurturing, loving. Throughout the pages of Scripture, the shepherd is held up as this model of care and affection and kindness and gentleness. I've not known many shepherds in my life, but one thing that I think is true universally about dealing with sheep is it really doesn't do you any good to yell and scream at them. It really doesn't do you. They have this uncanny ability to not really care too much about that. If anything, be annoyed and bothered by it. And they respond very well to tender and gentle leading and caring and protecting. And so when something is pastoral, it is in the way of a shepherd, the way a shepherd would do things. I don't want to get too far down this road, but another thing that's not in my notes that pops in my head, where all the warning signs go, don't do this, don't do this, don't do, and I just go, no, I'm going to do it anyway. So I was reading a book not too long ago, a really great book that I recommend called The Masculine Mandate, which, considering the audience that I'm in right now, probably is not a book you would be interested in reading, but a very good book nonetheless. And in that book, he traces the call of manhood back to the very original call of manhood that was given in the garden. Watch over this garden and keep it. Watch and keep. To keep a garden is to tend, to nurture, to cultivate, to provide. To watch is to protect, to give care over and make sure nothing harms it. And it's interesting to me that as we see the evolution of masculinity through the Bible, from the very original mandate, where he said, this is something I'm giving you, watch over it and care for it. Later on, as we see this word pastoral, and I'm not meaning to make this a masculine feminine thing, I'm just tracing the lineage of the word, this idea of pastoral covers those same kind of things. To be warmly affectionate for the best interest of that which is placed under your care. And so this letter is a very pastoral letter. It's written very much in that kind of tone. Paul expresses enormous affection. It's one of the most affectionate, one of the gentlest, one of it just has a tenderness to it that's wonderful in this book. You'll find that. I've got a bunch of examples, but we will cover all of this as we go through it. Let me just set the frame right here. Paul begins his epistles typically with they call it I don't remember what the technical term for it is, but it's the Pauline greeting, which is 2 words, and one of them is the word of greeting to the Jews. One of them is the word of greeting to the Gentiles. Anybody remember Paul's 2-word greeting that he uses in almost every epistle? Maybe every epistle. Grace and peace. Grace and peace. The Thessalonian letter includes the normal greeting, where Paul is turning to the Gentiles and he's saying to them, peace, shalom. That's the word that they would have associated. Grace, charis. That's the word they would have associated with a warm pastoral greeting. And he turns to the Jews and he says, shalom. This is the word they would have associated. From the very beginning of this letter, he's looking to unite these 2 groups of people into one family. And he goes on in great detail with great affection to show how important that is to him. His themes are encouragement, thanksgiving. He's grateful for them. He loves them. He wants to see them do well. He wants to encourage them. When he would write later about spur one another on to love and good works, that is very much what he's doing in this letter. And he sets a great example for us. He sets a great example for us. I think one of the greatest attributes that the Christian church today can have, and one of the greatest tools at our disposal, is the ability to be an encouragement, to bring out of other people the things that they may not see that they even have and possess, but to breathe life into those skills and talents. And Paul is doing that. And we will highlight over and again through this letter how many times he does that. Secondly, it's a very simple letter. Paul sometimes writes in very complicated ways. Peter would famously write in, I think it's 2 Peter. Peter would write, many things Brother Paul says that are hard for us to understand. Well, I don't think he was talking about 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, because 1st and 2nd Thessalonians is actually pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. It's pretty easy to read. It's got a straightforward message and a straightforward delivery. Paul was a really, really sharp dude. Paul could write really, really high scholarship stuff. If you're wrong, like Bishop, and think that he wrote Hebrews, then you see Paul writing at a really high level, but he really didn't write it. But if you believe that, then you see him writing at a really high level. Thessalonians is on the other end of Paul's spectrum. Paul was able to get down and write to very common people. In our journey group that meets on Sunday afternoons, we've been studying the works of C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis, to me, is a perfect example of that. C.S. Lewis is this incredible thinker. I mean, just an incredible thinker who is able to just delve into such deep thoughts that there is stuff I read of his 3 and 4 times on a page, and I'm still like, man, I'm just like, I can't get it. And then, yeah, she's holding up the book. You know it. You got it. And then there's other times when he writes the Chronicles of Narnia, that I read when I was 9. He's able to do that. Paul is an incredible literary mind. Paul is able to write these letters like 1st and 2nd Thessalonians that anybody can pick up and read and find totally accessible. And he's able to write stuff that even Peter goes, phew, man, there's a lot there. He is a really, really amazing writer. But here, he puts it on the low shelf. It's very easy. It's very straightforward. And I think there's a reason for that. He's writing to new Christians. He's writing to a new church. He's writing to a new movement. This is a time to be very elementary. This is a time when it's milk over meat. They're still coming up in their faith. They're still starting to understand just the basics of what this is all about. And Paul is really cool to say, let me meet you where you are. Let me take you where you are, and let's grow from there. Yeah, Roger.
It also, as you already mentioned, the fact that we're already used to the blood sacrifice type of thing, and they had already, we'll go through Thessalonians, and he'll say how much I love you, because they were doing exactly what he was wanting. So it was easy to write that.
It really was. It really was easy to write that. That's a good point, Roger. This is not like a put-on kind of affection. This is not one of those, I'll fake it till I make it, I'll talk better than I feel. I genuinely believe that you're right. He really had a deep, true affection for these people, and it was because he saw them as these little children in Christ who were really, really trying hard. He did. Very much that way. Very much that way. And it's a beautiful thing. Let me ask a question here. I got time. What's your favorite book of the Bible to read? Just, you've got an hour? Is it really, Jason, or is it just now? It really is. Okay. He said Ruth, and Ruth is next year's Bible bullet, so I thought he was just saying that he's getting a leg up already. What's your favorite book just to read for fun?
Judges.
Okay, now that's sick and twisted, but we'll deal with you on another day. Judges shouldn't, unless you're a 7th or 8th grade boy, you should never think Judges is a fun book to read. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just.
I know I'm weird.
I'm kidding. What's your favorite book to read? Psalms. Yeah, there are parts of it, right? There are parts of it you're like, I'll just flip. Now I'm back to where I want. Yeah, Psalms is a beautiful one. Yeah. What's your favorite book to read? Hebrews. I love Hebrews. I'm actually reading through Hebrews right now. If you're following along with our Bible reading program here, we're in Hebrews. And I'm being reminded of how beautiful a book that is. What great syllogisms and imagery he puts and comparisons.
It's the book that tells us that we're now, we can go to the presence of God like in the holies of holies.
Yeah. It is absolutely a beautiful book, beautiful book. And while I teased earlier about being complex, it has complex material, but it's actually explained in a very good way. Yeah. I'm a believer that whatever your favorite book in the Bible is says something about you. Sorry, Jennifer, but I think that there is something to be said for that. Jennifer, I'm weird too. My favorite book is Ecclesiastes. That's my favorite book to read. And somebody would go, yeah, a person dealing with lifelong depression, that makes perfect sense. You should probably like that book. But it's not for that reason. It's for a different reason altogether. Carol.
I like James.
James is a great book. James is you don't even have to read it. You've got it memorized, so you can just read it.
One time we did, King James Version.
Yeah, yeah. James is so incredibly practical. James, I like to call James the Proverbs of the New Testament because it just has such incredible practicality. I would like to suggest to you that if you'll allow it, 1 Thessalonians could be one of your favorite books to read. I tease about Ecclesiastes, and I do love Ecclesiastes, but when I sit down and just have time to read for fun, I go to Philippians. Philippians tends to be the book that I tend to like the most. But as I've been reading through and preparing for this class, I'm finding how enjoyable 1 Thessalonians can really be. And I think that if you'll give it a chance, it can actually be a book that you'll really enjoy for all the reasons we've talked about. Love, encouragement, pastoral, caring, affection, and finally, the last point up here, eschatological focus. It is very, very much a lift up your eyes, look down the road kind of book. When I was learning to drive a car, my grandfather was the one that took me out for the first time to teach me to drive a car, which was a huge mistake on many, many levels. But one of them was, by that point, he was blind as a bat. The other was that he drove like I don't know what it was. It was a land yacht. This was the biggest car in the history of the world. I don't know what it was. I don't remember. It was so big. Some of you will remember this. The turn signals were actually on the hood. Did you ever see a car like that? Where the turn signal indicators, the indicators for the turn signal weren't in here. Bing, 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 bing. No, they were out on the end of the hood, and they stood up like this, and they would flash. Does nobody remember a car like that? Oh my goodness, I'm thankful that somebody does. But that's what I learned to drive in. And I remember driving down Highway U with my grandfather one of the very first times we went out to drive, which, by the way, there's a problem. One of the very first times we drive, I went out to Highway U. You don't know Highway U, but it is a busy highway in rural Missouri that looks like this. And it was a terrible road to begin driving on. And so I'm terrified. I'm looking over the top of the steering wheel, and I've got my eye on the turn signal indicator sticking up, and I've got the line in the middle of the road, and I'm just trying to keep it together. And it just means that all I'm doing is constant. Readjust, overcompensate, readjust, overcompensate. I'm swerving. He's getting seasick. I'm scared to death. He looks at me and he goes, Jeffrey, lift up your eyes. Look down the road. And I've always been profoundly struck by that. So much of life is lived in this adjust, overcompensate, adjust, overcompensate, adjust, today, this moment, today, this moment. And I think Thessalonians is a letter that says, Christians, look up, look down the road, lift up your eyes. Don't forget that your journey is leading you to a destination. There's something out there that we have to anticipate, look forward to, that we're moving towards. In a world where so few people, I'm sorry, I'm getting preachy. In a world where, I'm going to do it anyway, so you just might as well settle in. In a world where so few people seem to have a really good reason of why they're here, what's going on, where their life is headed, and what purpose they live for, Christians are called to have that. And guys, that is a great, great blessing. It is a great blessing to wake up in the morning and be able to say, I'm here for a reason. God has a purpose. I am significant. Not in a boastful, self-aggrandizing way. Don't use words you can't say, Jeffrey. In a big, boasting way, it's not like that. It's in a true, sincere way that says, I know I'm on a road. This road has a destination, and the destination is something I'm looking forward to, and that is the second coming of Jesus Christ. It's called parousia. That's the Greek word for the second coming. I could have put that up there. That would fit. Parousia is a very important theme in this book. One of the great challenges in Christianity is to balance the day-to-day with the long-term. I believe so firmly that the journey of Christianity is to be able to really enjoy and to really be present and to really be productive in the moment while never losing sight of what you're going towards. We can go either way in a bad way. We can get so wrapped up in the second coming that it's just like all I've got to do is just get through, just try to get through, try to grind it out, and just someday it'll all be better. We can also do the other, where we get so enraptured with the blessings of today and the joys of today and the moment that we're in that we forget there's something great. This letter is a letter of balance. It gives us practical lessons on how to live day to day in the presence of God that's good and joyful and things to be encouraged about and excited for. And it never lets us lose sight of the fact there's something great that we're headed towards. There's a destination, there's a journey that we're on, and that's a beautiful thing. This is actually very important when you consider that this was a time of great persecution. One of the things that was difficult for them was the day-to-day wasn't good. The day-to-day was hard. The day-to-day was persecution and resistance and pressure from the world, and they needed to be reminded. They needed to be reminded, hey, I know today is hard, but even in today, there's good that you can find. And don't forget, there's something great you're headed towards. When we're in times of persecution, when we're in times of difficulty, I think it's significant that we understand, how in the world do I have 5 more pages, 6 more pages, 7 more pages? No, that's not going to happen. It's really important for us to understand that we're working towards something, and we're on a journey towards something. No. There, no. We'll pick all that up. Let me just close by this. I've got 1 minute. I'm going to go fast. Wrap everything up that we've talked about in terms of the book itself. And it really comes down to a couple of very important themes. Paul is writing so he can strengthen and encourage new believers. Young in their faith, facing persecution, challenges, and he writes to them to say, you can do this, keep on, keeping on, you got this. Second, he's writing to clarify some misconceptions about Christ's return. They knew Christ was coming back. They had some problems about like the timetable. You know, one of the challenges was Christ is coming back. Oh, sweet. I'll just sit here and wait. Well, you got to keep going during the day. You know, you got to still do your job and live your life and raise your family and take care of your business, you know. And he had to help them with that. Third, a call for a holy and disciplined life. And this is a timeless message that is just as needful and just as true and valuable today as it was when it was written. That we as Christians are called to live a life that is demonstrably different from the world. That is demonstrably significant in its light, in its salt, in the way that it exudes to the world, a reality of something living within us, a purpose and a significance that's not based on our goodness, but it's based on the God that we serve, a holy and disciplined life. And then fourth, this beautiful message. I want you to know, young children, that I love you, that I believe in you, that there's a reassurance, that there's a theme of Paul. There's not there's no ulterior motive. It's genuine, it's authentic, and it's sacrificial. I'm excited to study this book with you. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a great time. And I hope to see you next week as we jump into the first chapter. Thanks.